All right, it's Monday. It is a Monday. It is April, what does it say on there? April 15th. Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. So, this has been brewing for about a week. Did want to shoot this quite a while ago. Getting over being very, very sick. Had a pretty bad fever. It was actually so bad that I called into work, which is something that I rarely do. Kind of mutated into just a really bad sore throat, possible sinus infection kind of thing. Throat's still a little scratchy, so excuse my cough drop suckage, but got to do what I got to do to get by. Wanted to make this. I want to talk about my friend's band that put out a fantastic double LP discography as the centerpiece for this discussion, the nucleus, if you will. This is the Funeral Discography 2001 to 2004. Now, I could ramble at length about how personally this hits me right in the feelings to look at all these old pictures. Nice violet vinyl there, by the way, which I think was the pre-order color. You know, I will talk about it somewhat. I'll try not to be overly verbose, but great band that meant a lot to me. That was actually also very, very, very good musically. There were a lot of trends in hardcore at the time, a lot of which I was in favor of, whether it was the kind of the locking out worship of kind of bouncy late 80s New York hardcore stuff, the sort of like blood splatter, you know, personal lyrics, American Nightmare thing. You had the kind of gloomy, quote-unquote stadium crust kind of deal with kind of melodic, fast, D-beatish kind of hardcore from Ashes Rise, Tragedy. There were bands that were using rock riffs, like 70s rock riffs in hardcore. Isn't it cool? You know, that whole thing with like Suicide File. If you were into hardcore at the time, you may be familiar with what I'm talking about. If you weren't, just take my word for it. Those were some of the hottest kind of vibes that were going on at the time. Of course, you know, there was also metalcore starting to take off. The debate rages on whether or not, you know, bands like Bleeding Through or 18 Visions like really had anything to do with hardcore at the time. I was pretty puritanical at the time myself, so they didn't to me. In a lot of ways, they weren't metal or hardcore because I liked metal. But that new stuff, that what was new stuff at the time, I really hated. Now I could really care less. I hear it in the background. I'm like, it's not that bad. I just hate it when they sing that way. Whatever, you know. And I think some of the more respectable bands like Poison the Well, I like maybe should give them a shot. Maybe I probably won't. Anyway, this band kind of existed in this vacuum geographically and musically that would probably have something for an appeal to people that were into all the stuff that I described, but were very much forging their own path and just doing their own thing. They were fast. As far as like the approach to the guitar work, there was a lot of, you know, riding the E, kind of tight metallic sort of stuff going on. You know, you could say that like people that were into like The Promise and Terror and bands like that would get something out of the Funeral, but they also had a very kind of gloomy punk edge that might appeal to people into like Wolf Brigade and Tragedy. They had a sort of looming, lumberous, heavy end when they decided to go slow that was almost kind of sludgy, you know, predating bands like Cursed. The lyrics were, you know, very like satirical, cynical, bitter, largely critiquing capitalism, society. Very smart, courtesy of the singer Ryan, who is one of my oldest friends. I've known him about 25 years at this point. He runs the imprint that's put this out, which is Hex Records. They've put out a lot of different stuff. Not all of it is my bag, but I have to always applaud Ryan for putting out what he loves. There's some stuff that he does that kind of leans towards like the heavier, more brutal end of things, but it's also not as easily definable. You know, stuff like Engineer or Ed Gein, who are like kind of a technical grind band. He's done lots and lots of releases up to this point, we'll put it that way. I'm going to leave a link to the Bandcamp and his various other I think he's done a blog spot where he's done a retrospective on all of his older releases and interviews the members of the bands. I've been kind of pouring through that. It's very interesting. So he's put out some stuff I like, some stuff I don't. But as far as when I came back to Syracuse after living in Maine, which was late 2002, I think, or early 2003, you know, Ryan was a big mover and a shaker. He's one of the people that started Hellfest. He stopped having anything to do with it after a little while. He booked shows at the Westcott, actually worked at the Westcott Community Center where all these DIY shows happened when I moved back. Put out a zine, Hanging Like a Hex, and fronted this band. The guitarist Grant, featured on the front cover there, is the guy that got me into tons of good stuff, including, I mean, he's the guy that I first heard Death Spell Omega from, Midnight, into tons of good metal, tons of good punk. You know, just one of those people whose musical knowledge is bordering on intimidating. You know, everybody has that one friend. I'd lived with the other guitarist Travis for a while, their bassist Andy I hung out with a lot over the years. Usually visit him whenever I go to New York, which at this point hasn't been years and years. But my point is, you know, I know all these guys. I've known them all for a long time. I was very involved in participating every time they played live. They were lots and lots of fun. This includes everything they recorded, of course. 2 demos, a comp song, which is, I believe, an Infest cover, their first album, Ruled by None, and their second album that was unreleased officially. It came out on a burned CDR. That last album they did is the best thing they've done, in my opinion. Their first album and their earlier demos are a lot, like, kind of straight up weighty, heavy. I think they're down-tuned. Very crushing, with interspersed fast parts. They really, I think they tune up, it sounds like, on the second one, and they really rip very fast, like bordering on kind of like, you know, crossover thrash metal kind of tempos, but never, you know, pandering to that, just going at that velocity, essentially. Just really, really, really great stuff. The booklet that comes with it, packed with lyrics, all the lyrics. There's a great timeline of every single show they played that was recorded. An intro by my friend Chuck, who was also very involved in the scene, sang for a band called Black SS. And then, like, a blow-by-blow, this is what happened when we recorded, this was our first practice, you know, by each member of the band, they're retelling. Kind of like Motley Crue's The Dirt, but way more wholesome. And interesting note, the original vocalist, if you can see there, John, was a guest on the channel a year and a half ago or so, my neighbor. Yeah. And also, I forgot, until I, you know, cracked this open, was looking at it a couple of weeks ago, I sang backing vocals on this. So if you want to hear me sing backing vocals on a hardcore record, you can check out the Bandcamp at the link below. So anyway, this brought back a lot of memories. This band was really good. They were really smart. You know, there was, you know, despite the fact that everybody in the band was at least vegetarian and straight edge, there was no aping of that. They went way more creative with the type of issues they wanted to talk about. They came out during a time where there was a vacuum in Syracuse for, like, bigger shows, even mid-sized, like, hardcore shows. The Westcott Community Center that I previously mentioned had been having DIY shows for a while at that point, maybe 5 or 6 years. But it really blew up with the Funeral, Black Sheep Squadron when they started. A host of other bands that kind of brought in everybody. I mean, there weren't just one type of kids going to the shows, you know, there's such a diverse roster of music that would go through there. And often that doesn't work. You know, the mixed bill CD changer kind of, one type of band playing with a radically different band from another genre thing, like, often kind of falls flat. But Ryan booked those shows a lot, and they often went off without a hitch. So, big rambling diatribe about why I'm happy to have this in my hands. I'm curious to hear what people think. Like, if you like that type of hardcore, you know, give it a listen and let me know if it's as good as I think it is or if it's just rose-colored glasses. I think these guys really, really, really smoked. If you like stuff that was kind of around that time for faster hardcore coming back, you know, a little bit of metal, all that kind of thing. I think there's something there for everybody, personally, if you like hardcore. So check it out. So along with the Funeral LP, I picked up this band, Null. This is called Act of Love. This band features members of Coliseum, who are a Louisville band. That Coliseum was like a dirty, you know, fast, big orange amps kind of thing, kind of band. You know, like they were sort of D-Beat inspired. Part of that wave of bands that were influenced by Tragedy when that stuff was kind of blowing up. They were a little bit different, you know. They were a little more like, had some odd time changes, had some other kind of influences creeping in. I think a little bit more on the way of slow parts, maybe, if I remember correctly. It's been years since I've listened to Coliseum. And this is their new project. It's nothing like Coliseum. And it's also very good. It's kind of meditative, sort of like droney rock stuff. Excuse me. It, at times, oddly sort of seems reminiscent of Killing Joke to me. But I might be totally off base because admittedly, there's not a ton of stuff like Null that I listen to. The guitar tone is heavy, but it's not like this all-encompassing wall of sound. It's just like kind of one piece in the puzzle kind of going. There's a lot of repetition of lyrics. There's some kind of like interesting synth work that's more like kind of noise looping in and out. A really fun, engaging listen. I just picked this up because I didn't want to just pick up one thing from Hex. You know, always try to support your friends to the fullest extent of your ability and their endeavors. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is kind of hit or miss with me. I'm starting to get more open-minded in my old age, but this I was just like, yeah, all right, this is great. Yeah, it's weird because it is pretty heavy, but it's also very calming. Very hard to describe, you know, but cool. You know, I've heard, I don't know, I read the blurb on the website. It was mention of like Lungfish. It doesn't sound like the Lungfish record I have, which is Necrophones to me, but cool anyway. Next up, I got this for next to nothing. It's weird, man. Japanese hardcore, it seems like it's like impossibly expensive or like pennies on the fucking dollar. So speaking of Grant, the guy on the cover of the Funeral record, the guitarist, I remember him saying like when Tragedy blew up, or as far as I remember, it might have been somebody else, but I seem to remember him saying like, oh, Tragedy cribbed a bunch of stuff off of Crude. And I think that's pretty apt. This actually came out on the guy from Tragedy's label, Feral Ward. Great blazing Japanese hardcore. What's really great is the rhythmic approach. You know, they're obviously taking a lot from those thunderous kind of discharge sort of drums. You know, that sort of rhythmic style, but interspersed between the there's these crazy fills that just go all over the place. It is fucking wild, and the guitarist is a maniac. Like there's a lot of really, really great face melting kind of melodies on it. I talked about another Crude record not that long ago. I think that was their latest EP. And that was cool, but it was this weird, it sounded like the sound on this, but maybe slowed down a touch and had this deliberately really garagey production on it. I definitely like this the most. Then we got Left 4 Dead. So this is a Left 4 Dead discography that was released on A389 out of Baltimore that just recently shuttered their doors, unfortunately. Dom put out a lot of good stuff. Sad to see them go. This is called Devoid of Everything. It's everything that they recorded, save for like a really poor sounding live set that was on their previous discography release that was called Splitting Heads. Also, this appears to be remastered, or maybe even remixed. The sound is different. Normally, you know, that's a big no-no with a lot of reissues and stuff like that, but this sounds really good. This is Toronto's Left 4 Dead. Actually, I know they're Ontario. They might be London, Ontario. They're from Canada. They're great. So Chris Colohan, one of my favorite lyricists. Lyrically, he's definitely at his most vicious and pissed off on this. Pulling no punches. Just look up the lyrics for Who Do You Know? Nice Place to Raise Children's another one, referring to human real estate and all this sort of stuff. A lot of social critique, obviously. Musically, short songs, brutally heavy, a guitar tone, a bass tone rather, that really gives, I'd say, Peter Steele and Shane Embury like a run for their money as far as just weightiness, forcefulness. Very fast. You know, it doesn't really fit in a convenient box. It's got something, I think, for people who like the first like Hatebreed 7-inch and demo, when they still had really dirty recording and had a significant almost kind of like death or grind influence. It's got something for people who like Infest. Definitely a lot of like bordering on blasting fast into like disgusting, crushing, heavy breakdowns, and really raw production. It's a classic. I mean, when this came out, all of my friends in Syracuse were all about it. The first kind of like little group of kids that primarily went to the smaller shows, the DIY shows at the Westcott, were nuts about this. And it was described to me originally as a grindcore version of Chokehold. And in an odd sort of way, yeah, it kind of is. But it also, like, that's a very silly description. I don't know. One of my favorite hardcore bands, records, whatever, lyrically. I bought this in the same lot with the Attitude stuff off with some guy on Discogs, and it was like $7 or something like that, which is crazy. So yeah, devoid of everything. Some cover art that'll get me in trouble there, probably. Next up, should I censor this? Cut the S word. This band was from Boston. They were around, again, early 2000s. I think they started up maybe a year or two after I moved back to Syracuse. I routinely went home to Boston all the time. It's a home of sorts. I would routinely go back to Boston and see shows all the time. I had a lot of disposable income. I was a delivery driver. I delivered friggin' burritos and made a ton of money in tips and paid like $200 a month for rent the whole time I was living in Syracuse during that time. So every weekend I was out of town doing something. Sorry about the cough drop thing, but I'm trying not to die here. Actually get through this friggin' update. Cut the Shit were, again, part of this whole kind of... It's weird because it was 80s hardcore style, but it was 80s hardcore 2.0. You know, there weren't really too many bands that I think successfully, or in some cases, in a lot of cases, weren't interested in doing a carbon copy of what was going on between 80 and 84 hardcore wise. You know, like, this had modern production. It was like, yeah, of course, similar approach to songwriting, but, you know, influences kind of formed in such a way that, like, yeah, it sounds like it's from the early 2000s, but it's just that kind of hardcore. Cut the Shit were a really good band. They played with, who did I see them with? I saw them with Suicide File at their supposed last show. I saw them a couple of other shows. I think I saw them with the A-Team once in Cambridge, and they were a lot of fun. Very, very, very energetic frontman that was all over the place. A guy named Andrew, who originally sang for Bones Brigade, who are more of a crossover kind of band. These guys, it wasn't blatant. I think that was like kind of in retrospect, like certain bands that did that AC/DC or, you know, 70s rock kind of riff thing were like really kind of blatant, and I don't know if that held up so well, that whole, like, you know, throwing a rock riff in the middle of a hardcore song kind of thing. But these guys, it just feels like they were just a little bit of rock and roll thrown in there, and it's just being played really fast. You know, there's no stopping and doing like a rock riff, basically. Very, very great record, over in a hot minute. This is better than I remember it. I remember having it on CD and kind of being underwhelmed. And then I went to the local junk shop Which City Consignments and was flipping through the records, and somebody just sold their like hardcore records. There were a few things in there. This was $5. I figured, what have I got to lose? Great live band. In a lot of ways, they covered DYS. In a lot of ways, I feel like they sound like DYS at their best, so like half of the Brotherhood record. Similar kind of approach and attack, at least when DYS played fast, I think. But again, like I said, modern production, you know, a few other influences creeping in, its own thing. This came out on Gloom Records out of Albany, who put out a lot of great stuff. Nate Wilson, who I've ordered stuff from on Discogs a lot over the years, Crypto Comics on Discogs. Great guy, put out a lot of good stuff. Toxic Holocaust, John Brown's Army, dude played in Devoid of Faith, etc., etc. Next up, Wake of Humanity. This is a band from Seattle. This is a new one. This just came out this year, or maybe it was 2018. Not sure on that. This is buddies of my friend Yumiko, who was around for that whole era of the Funeral. Ex-roommate of mine that just recently relocated to a neighboring, I can't remember what town in Mass, but she lives like a half an hour from me now, and she was living in Seattle for the past 10 years. These guys are from Seattle, and we just came out to support them, and it's great. Political, left-leaning political, of course, kind of crusty, hardcore stuff. You know, it's got its moments that it definitely reminds me of a lot of the heavy hitters from the aughts, you know, particularly Cursed and Tragedy, but it's got its own sort of thing going on. There's a little bit more of like maybe a little bit more of a blackened approach. There's a little bit more doominess to it. Very outspoken band on what they believe in and stand for. So check them out if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'll leave a link. But I really enjoyed them, and they definitely reminded me of a lot of the stuff that was going on during the Funeral's heyday. Last three of these are just pretty much update kind of style. None of these are really related to that thread, but I'm going to tack them on anyway. New Dead Heat. God damn, this smokes. Came out on Edgewood. This is Certain Death. I believe this one, by the way, is self-released. It's on Bitter Melody Records and Ugly and Proud Records. It said self-released on Discogs, whatever. All right, so Dead Heat. This smokes. Certain Death. Band that is from Oxnard, wears that sort of nardcore thing on their sleeves proudly. You can see this badass skeleton guy has a ill repute pin right there. Musically, I feel like it's a little bit more Venice than Oxnard, but it's definitely got a lot of West Coast thrash in general all over it. You know, good, strong Beowulf, suicidal, Excel sort of vibe. Kind of taking those influences and kind of making it even faster and more immediate. You know, it's not the only influence. They cover Trapped by the Crumbsuckers as the last song on here. I'd heard a lot of hype talking about these guys just from listening to some podcasts like Axe to Grind and stuff like that. And this does not disappoint. It is a ripper. Came out on Edgewood. One of the few things that and the Funeral are like the only things I've pre-ordered like in my life. I think I've pre-ordered 5 records total because most of the time I just can't be bothered. Like I'll get it whenever, but this looked like it might actually sell out, so I wanted to pre-order it. And the Funeral, I was just so excited. So anyway, yeah, Dead Heat. If you like, you know, any of the aforementioned newer bands like Take Offense, they do kind of have a certain sort of Take Offense vibe, but whereas like Take Offense has a little bit like slower, moshier kind of stuff that brings to mind Madball mixed with the West Coast stuff, these guys are more just kind of straight up blazing, and I think they rule. Dead Heat. Certain Death. Conmen, Get Loose. Been waiting on this for a long time too. This has been recorded, I feel like, for quite a while. I heard friends talking about they previewed it and loved it, and I couldn't wait till it actually finally came out. This came out on Rock and Roll Disgrace. This bunch of Boston people that have been in some other bands, notably Dan, who is in Waste Management. My friend Jamie, who was in a band with me years ago, plays bass. She plays bass in Siamese Twins, this really cool death rock kind of band. But this is like perfect melodic punk stuff. You know, if you like 3-chord Ramonesy kind of stuff, if you like Lookout Records kind of shit, you like the Dickies, this is right up your alley. Kind of layered vocals, super catchy, not overproduced, you know, not sappy. It's got enough like snot to it, snotty attitude, brattiness. It is so fucking fun. I'm gonna be listening to it all summer long. And then because I was on there, rather I picked that up while I was sitting on this trying to snipe this, because this band is one of those bands where, not unlike, I guess the metal equivalent would be the Go to War X stuff, you know, they only put out so many copies, same label, Rock and Roll Disgrace, and they go like hotcakes, they go real quick. This is Battle Ruins. This is their second LP. The Glorious Dead. They decided to do a theme album about Marty's band. Fucking great. I mean, this is one of the best bands to come out of hardcore and metal. I mean, it's sort of metal too, in the past 10 years, in my opinion. They've been around for about 10 years at this point. Almost purely a project band. They once in a while play some massive show in Europe. They've played one here. For those unfamiliar with their music, it's pretty much its own thing. If you like super triumphant power metal, you know, the more simplistic kind of stuff like Manowar and that kind of shit. If you also like Oi, you know, it's somewhere in between there. You know, it's a combination of street rock and fantasy themed like battle hymns basically, and it fucking rules. If you weren't aware, the singer is also the singer from Magic Circle. His name's Brendan. I'm trying to think. I know Justin, it's DFJs and a ton of other bands that I've talked about. You can look into it yourself. If you're a fan of that stuff, you probably know. Yeah, this is no slouch. It's every bit as good as the debut LP, I think. The demo or 7-inch will always be my favorite thing that they did, but this is a close second, neck and neck with the first LP. Can't get enough Battle Ruins. Can't say enough good things. All right, that's it. Thanks for tolerating my coughing. Hopefully I'll be 100% next time.